Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome back to the Spotlight. This is our weekly news science wrap-up show. We sort of debated whether we should run this one because, as many of you would realize, this has been an extremely busy week. This might be the third one of our podcasts this week that you're listening to, but that's because it is a once every 4 years event that begins tomorrow night in Milan, and that is the Winter Olympic Games of 2026. And we've been trying our best to cover some of the sports that we think would be most interesting to you. Yesterday was a cross-country skiing podcast with a guest from Norway, Eivind Sandbakk. On Monday was a figure skating podcast. And joining me today to talk about the news, sort of unrelated to that, but we'll maybe touch on it, is a newly converted figure skating fan, thanks to Jackie Wong's contribution on this podcast. Gareth, can't wait for figure skating.
That might be taking it slightly too far, to be honest. I did say that it slightly converted me because I've never been a figure skating fan. You couldn't quite understand that, could you? But I've never really liked figure skating, I'm not going to lie. But listening to that podcast, I learned a lot, and I'm actually looking forward to it. And as I always say, the more you know about a sport, the more you enjoy it.
Exactly. So that's really the intention. And we sort of thought, which sports should we focus on? And figure skating is like the one that's got the most cultural relevance, I think, to people who don't normally follow sport. Cross-country skiing and biathlon purely because they're the endurance sports. And then tomorrow we've got another one coming for you on the ice. So we've got snow, ice and artistic. And then next week we've actually also got a couple of guests lined up around the Winter Olympics to give us some insights about what it's like for an athlete and to talk about the what are called the park and pipe sports, so you can look forward to that as well. We'll wrap up the show with a little bit more discussion on the Winter Olympics. But what we wanted to start with today is the exact opposite of Winter Olympics, and that was the summer heat of Melbourne, which we did discuss last week in what was to that point a relatively routine Australian Open, and then it all kicked off in the semi-finals and the final, where I think we got three classic matches and with so many interesting talking points. And we begin our Australian wrap-up with the semi-finals. And oddly, we discussed last week, Musetti had just withdrawn against Djokovic in the quarterfinals, I think it was. And we'd discussed Sinner earlier in the tournament being saved by the heat protocols. And then sure enough, in a semi-final between the eventual winner, Carlos Alcaraz, and Alexander Zverev of Germany, we saw another dramatic turn in the third set. And there were so many interesting talking points because Alcaraz pulled up, I think it was about 3-3 or 4-3 in the third set. He was winning comfortably to that point. And was it a cramp? Was it an injury? He ended up losing the third, he lost the fourth and came back in the fifth. And there was so much interesting discussion, not only among ourselves, but also many of our listeners over on Discourse in our supporters club. But Gareth, I think that it was an unbelievable last 3 days to that tournament.
Yeah, I've said many times that tennis doesn't grab me until the later stages of the tournament. And it happened again. And I'm a bit of a tennis convert as well now. And the controversy certainly helped. But it was the quality of the tennis as well. Alcaraz in those first two sets was imperious. And this cramping issue, which it does appear to be cramp, the way he was walking around the court definitely suggested cramp. And he called for the medical timeout. I think it was, like you say, 4-4, I think it was. And it was Zverev was absolutely fuming, wasn't he? He was arguing with the umpire that the rules forbid timeouts for cramping. But there's not a lot he can do about it. And I wonder if that inspired him because he went on to take the next two sets. So whether that was to do with Alcaraz's physical condition, we don't know. But it really set up the deciding set perfectly.
Yeah, the third set Zverev won because Alcaraz could barely serve. He couldn't walk. He couldn't drive through his legs to get power on the serve, and that was the most obvious thing that you could see. He was trying to win the points in the second, third shot that he was hitting, so he was clearly affected by it. So third set, yeah, you give that to Zverev on the basis of injury, but then Alcaraz got better and better. But just go back to the moment. I don't know that Alcaraz would have known if it was cramp or a muscle spasm or strain at the very moment that it happened. I reckon within 2 or 3 minutes he knew, but at the first moment, because you would have cramped, right? And like in the very first few seconds, you don't know what it is.
Oh, yeah, you do tend to know it's cramp.
I don't
You
know.
know,
Like if you get a very localized cramp, you can't tell. I certainly couldn't. If I cramped in my calf, I couldn't tell if there was a cramp or a slight muscle twinge.
well, the easiest way to tell is if it's a cramp, you immediately try to alleviate it. Your body will automatically try to straighten it out. You do all sort of weird dance if it's in your legs, as you hop on one leg and try to straighten the other one out, or you flop to the floor and try and straighten your leg. If it's an injury, you stop moving
Yeah,
because your
none.
body automatically knows to protect it and stop moving.
Yeah, it's interesting because okay, so let's talk about the moment it happened. He came to the net, and I think he lost the point, and as he was walking back to the baseline, you could see that he was sort of stretching it out on the one side only. So it was one side only. It seemed to be quite localized to his adductor, like inner quad, inner thigh, if you wish. Like from all the lateral movements in tennis, you can understand why that muscle would fatigue and then cramp. I'm still not convinced that he would know that it was cramp as opposed to like a pull. And maybe I'm giving him too much of the benefit of the doubt. But when he went back to the chair to get the medical treatment, he said to the umpire, "I felt a pull," which is what you would feel with a cramp. At the same time, he sank a pickle juice shot, and he would do that every changeover for the next 3 or 4. I reckon I think he put away 3 or 4 pickle juice shots. So that suggests that he would have known it was a cramp. But I'd be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt to say he may not have known. But Zverev certainly seemed to know what it was. And that's why he was
Yeah,
upset
I mean,
about it.
Alcaraz actually said afterwards, he said he defended himself. He said, in the beginning, when it was on a specific muscle, I didn't think it was cramp at all. So I didn't know exactly what it was because I just go around to a forehand and I started to feel it just in the right adductor. So that's why I called the physio. It was just that moment. The rest of the legs, the left leg was good, not good, but decent. After that, with all the stress, I just don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's going to be worse or not. So, and then he decided to take the medical timeout. But yeah, I mean, you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt, I suppose. But I think the cramp stops you immediately. All the cramps I've had, there's no way I'd be able to continue playing tennis on a cramping leg.
Yeah, and I mean
It's
he
excruciating.
barely did. Because in those next 3 or 4 games, I mean, he just conceded the set. As I say, he was trying to hit a
Mm.
winner on the first shot because he knew he couldn't run. The most obvious tell for it was the serve. He just, as I said, he couldn't drive up and get any power on the serve, so he was looping them in. So he loses the set, he loses the fourth. The thing that saves him is that then the sun has gone down behind the grandstand, so it starts to get cooler on the court. You recover from cramp eventually. I mean, you don't get 100% right, and I don't think he was all the way through, but he certainly improved enough. And by the fifth set, it looked like a more or less equal contest between two tired players as opposed to one cramping and one fatigued player. And he manages to win it despite being, I think it was a breaker serve down. Zverev had an opportunity to serve out that match and couldn't. And so, yeah, the rest is history. He makes the final and wins it. Now, couple things are pickle juice we all know about. We spoke about it last week and we have before. You take it to help alleviate. They don't remove a cramp, but they certainly would help break that reflex. So that would have maybe kept him going long enough to survive into recovery, as it were. In the midway through the fourth set, he starts to recover. And the other interesting thing is, like with Jannik Sinner, that happens so early. Now, these are players in whom cramps shouldn't happen within the first 2 to 3 hours of playing tennis. They should be conditioned well enough for that. But the conditions are tough. And it was interesting in the post-match interview, the on-court one, which almost never gives you any insight into anything. They're so stupid. But this one did, and he said it was one of the most physical matches that he'd ever played. So I don't know whether there's a tension or whether there's a... Because he's cramped before in the French Open against Djokovic, also very early on. And he said that that was a consequence of anxiety or tension, which could contribute to a sort of local muscle fatigue. So that was an interesting thing to hear him say, is that it's not the work you're doing that causes the cramp, it's something else.
Mm. As you say, the lack of, well, the reduction in heat seemed to certainly have an effect. And the final was a lot cooler, and I'm just skipping ahead there, but the final was a lot cooler and he didn't seem to have any problems there. So it seemed to be heat induced. Because that was a fantastic match. And then we went straight into Djokovic and Sinner straight afterwards. And if you thought you'd seen a great match in the first one, the second one was probably even better in a way.
I think the standard was probably higher, yeah. Not as many interesting talking points maybe, but on-court talking points. But yeah, Djokovic beat
Yeah.
Sinner. And it's interesting, there's a stat doing the rounds. I don't know if you've seen it. Sinner has never won a match longer than 3 hours and 50 minutes. Now, that's an oddly specific number. I suspect it's because he probably won a match at like 3:48 or something. So that's just drawn a line at 3:50. But he hasn't won. He hasn't won these big 5-set epic matches in the same way that others have. I saw a stat the other day, like Nadal is at 80-odd%, Alcaraz is at 92% of matches at 4 hours long. He wins those. Federer, incidentally, pretty poor in those long matches also. But yeah, I think Sinner's got some durability problems. I think he's also got some tennis problems. He tends to, I think, lapse into a little bit of a monotonous game. But my Grand Slam prediction for Sinner in 2026 failed at the first hurdle. Didn't even make it to the first hurdle, actually, if you think about it.
Because obviously Djokovic won that game. He actually he saved 16 out of 18 break points in that match, and 8 in the one game alone. That was so for resilience wise, Djokovic is your man.
Weren't there
But
like 11 in the
going
fifth
back-
set? Like I think most of them were in the fifth set. It was crazy. Like he was really, really good on the big points. And I did see that. And actually in the final, it wasn't that dissimilar. Not quite as extreme as 16 out of 18, but Djokovic was really good when he had to be in this tournament.
Yeah, but going back to Sinner, he doesn't seem to, and I'm no tennis analyst, but he doesn't seem to change his game at all. When Alcaraz was playing Djokovic in the final, he got blown away in the first set, but then he seemed to change his tactics slightly. He was thinking the ball over the net a little bit more, moving Djokovic around. He sort of changed the way the game was being played. He didn't just keep trying to plough the same furrow as Sinner seems to do. He just seems to do the same thing over and over again. Very well, of course.
Yeah,
But in this case, Djokovic had the answers.
Yeah, that's what I think. Sinner's game feels like it's too rhythmical and too monotonous to disrupt like the really good players. I remember when he lost the US Open final last year really, really badly to Alcaraz. People were saying he needs to think about introducing variety to his game, and I think even he said that. And then of course he finished the season really well, beat Alcaraz, and it looked like maybe he's working on some things. But in this tournament, it was the same thing. It's just frustrating because he seems to lapse into a kind of passivity. But he seems to have some physical durability issues and a monotonous game that the best players, if they're good enough, can match. But again, 8 out of 10 times in that game against Djokovic, he probably wins it given the break points that he had. But in the moment, he wasn't good enough to do that. Which actually reminds me, like one of my, this is not pet peeve, I wouldn't say it grinds my gears, but in the Australian Open, they'll often show these stats, like Djokovic has saved 73% of break points or something like that. Now, 16 out of 18 is 90-odd%. And they'll say something like he's been really good on the big points because he's won 73 of the points when he's serving, the pressure points. But that's a meaningless stat because he might win 71% of all the points on his serve, in which case winning 73% of break points is not doing any better than you do on any other point. You know what I mean? Like your base win percentage is 70, and so 71 is no different. So they never contextualize. They never contextualize data like that, and I think tennis analytics, the tennis analytics we see is so far below like what the players are probably using it for. It feels to me always like a missed opportunity.
If the players are getting the data, if they can't use their whoop bands, who knows what they see?
Yeah, but I mean they're getting that data from Bolt 6 or whatever it was called. But like the commentary I was watching was talking about where is Djokovic going to serve when he's 30-40 down. On the ad side, and they're saying he's going to go down the tee, and that's the serve Sinner needs to look for. So yeah, okay, cool, but show me that's happening 7 out of 8 times. But is that 7 out of 8? Is that different from where he's serving when it's love 15 or 15 love? Like, I just don't think they use the data in the right way to add insight. They just chuck numbers out.
No, yeah, they check numbers out, and I think, to be honest with you, we're guilty as viewers of just accepting them and don't really think about them, do we? Because we saw the same thing actually, because we had a chat about on the women's side, Sabalenka, because I read this stat that her forehand was traveling the same speeds as the men's, and it seemed quite remarkable to me. And then when we did a little bit more digging, it's because that she hits the ball very flat, whereas the men tend to take a lot of power off their forehand sometimes to induce spin, and that sort of thing. And so it's not really such a relevant stat all of a sudden, because you're comparing apples and oranges here, two different things. But that's never made clear because the headline that they put in on the screen is that Sabalenka hits the ball as hard as the men. It's sort of a bit disingenuous in a way.
Yeah, and also they show average speed, for instance, and like average forehand speed. Like if Alcaraz plays 10 drop shots, does his drop shot count as part of his average forehand speed? I don't know how they work that stat out. Because they're
No
not always
idea.
trying to hit it hard. So like they should probably show median or top 10% or some kind of distribution of forehand speeds or something if you really want to understand how someone is playing against you, not just an average. Yeah, what's that saying? Lies, and damn statistics or something like that.
Hmm.
Um,
We definitely saw that this weekend. Did you because going back to the women's game, because I was sure that Sabalenka was going to just destroy all in her path after beating Svitolina in the semi-final. She absolutely crushed her. I was convinced that she was going to win the final quite easily, and I did say that to you and Mike beforehand. I said, basically, Rybakina just looked like she was awaiting execution almost, the way that Sabalenka was like sort of staring her out at the net before. And I said, it's all over, lads. The body language is terrible. She doesn't stand a chance. And of course, that's my punditry gone up in smoke because Sabalenka didn't win the final. Um, and that's where we came up with an idea, didn't we? Because we have some great, insightful group chats going on when these tournaments are in progress or events are in progress. And I really enjoy them because I learn a lot. And you came up with the idea. You said, well, perhaps it shouldn't just be you learning these things. We ought to have some sort of online group chat with our supporters. And we've been thinking about it, and it might give me a goer. What do you reckon?
Yes, I think so. I mean, every time I watch live sport, it's enhanced by the opportunity to share thoughts with other people who are also watching it. And that was true. Alcaraz, Zverev, is it a cramp? Is it an injury? Should he have allowed a timeout? Is he going to finish the game? Should he retire hurt? What happens in the fifth set? Like, there's so many interesting discussion points. And the thing is, you, me, and Mike were on a WhatsApp group talking about them, and it just strikes me that like we could make that more available to lots of people because we've got this really cool community of supporters. So why not let other people also contribute to chats and share insights when sports events are happening? Because we know that happens already, right? If you are listening to this and you are a supporter, you know we've got this discourse community, and after an event, Tour de France, Olympics, whatever it is, people are sharing their impressions. So what we want to try and do as a kind of new value add for supporters is to create live chat on sports events. And the way that that'll work is that those of you who are supporters, in other words, you go on Patreon, links in the show notes, you sign up, you become a supporter, you would get a link to basically a chat room, a live chat room, and that room will be opened for selected sports events. So we would say, guys, it's the figure skating, cross-country skiing, biathlon, take your pick at the Winter Olympics, and for the next 2 hours, let's talk. Let's all share in our insights and opinions and what we're watching as we watch it. So we're going to do that, and those of you who are supporters over on Discourse, you'll see we're going to post something on there a little later about how it'll all work. And even if it's just 5 people, for me, those 5 people enhance my enjoyment of the sports watching experience. So that's what we're going to try and do as another value add for supporters.
You definitely get more out of it if you're discussing it with people. You're learning, you're able to sort of impart any knowledge that you've got on it. I mean, I obviously get a lot out of it. So I'm looking forward. Perhaps not figure skating, let's not run before we can
No,
walk here.
I agree. I mean, I don't know enough about figure skating. I could tell you that person fell over. That's about it.
But we're talking about slightly bigger events probably, but the ones I'd be looking forward to are things like marathons.
Yeah.
Because the insights that you provided to me over the marathons is quite incredible, really. And it's a shame that nobody else has seen those insights, only you, me, and Mike. So yeah,
Well,
I think the marathons would be a good example of how this might work.
marathons, monuments, Tour de France, and then like it would have been a classic opportunity, like halfway through this third set of the Alcaraz Zverev match, to say, let's open a Science for Sport live chat. Everyone's invited. Get in there. Let's talk about what we're watching. Is the pickle juice going to work? So yeah, that's the plan. So those of you who are supporters of the podcast, you will see that on Discourse. We'll be sharing that. Those of you who are not, click the link in the show notes. Basically, you're buying us a cup of coffee once a month, and in exchange, you'll get, among other things, access to that live chat. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. And I think we'll do one or two in the Olympics. I think it'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, going back to the tennis, which that's what made me think about it, was my prediction that Sabalenka was going to win. Have you got any insight as to why she didn't win? Because I know that you had a few at the time.
Well,
but because even when she won that second set, because she won 5 games in a row, all the momentum's going her way, and then it just drained out of her.
Yeah, so a few things there. Number one is she didn't win because she was playing against a really, really good opponent who has been... Remember, Rybakina won the women's equivalent of the season-ending finals last year. She beat everyone there. Mm-hmm. Earlier in the Australian Open, she absolutely walloped Swiatek, who was the other sort of top 2 or 3 favourite. So she's really good. She's always been quite good. I mean, she's a Wimbledon winner in 2022, I think, but hasn't maybe quite delivered. She's got some coaching history there. Her coach is a guy called Vukov, who was banned for a long time because of abusive behavior, not only towards Rybakina, but apparently to other players. I don't know exactly what the story behind it was, but the WTA in effect banned him for that. And he's only recently come back. Now, those of you who watched it, you'll have seen that between points and certainly between games, the players were walking over to their box and talking to them. Now, that's a relatively new thing in tennis. On-court coaching was never allowed, but they've made the call to allow it in the last couple of seasons, and I think it made a big difference for Rybakina because at 3-love down in that third set, I reckon she was pretty much on the way out. She was on the ledge, about to be pushed off it. And it was interesting, he shouted at her fairly sternly. Leanne was watching and he was like, wow, that's pretty aggressive behavior. He shouted at her to be more positive and to show more energy. And she did. And that energy coincided with her comeback. So I reckon that was a win for the on-court coaching system, because without that, I don't know, it's speculating, obviously, but would Rybakina have found that energy herself, or did she need that push? I think it was the latter.
It surprises me that coaches can have such an impact, because you assume that these athletes are so experienced and knowledgeable about what they need to do that they just do it anyway. So obviously it's going to affect some and benefit some more than others.
I think tennis is particularly vulnerable to coaching, even if it's just for emotional support, because look how much they look towards their coaches. Very few players don't do it. Federer was like one of the only ones who didn't constantly have to. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a crutch, but it's like they go there to ground themselves or to pick themselves up like really, really often. And now the opportunity to talk to someone, I think it makes a big difference, because I reckon when you're losing in a Grand Slam final, there's a real risk of panic, not thinking right. And someone can just remind you, give you your keywords, and you can find something. Now, it's trite to say Rybakina had that, because Sabalenka also had access to her coaches, and she didn't win the game. So it doesn't always work. But I think in this particular instance, Rybakina really benefited from the timing and the nature of the coach intervention there. And then, of course, she's got the biggest serve in the women's game, and it didn't break down. Sometimes it does. So once she had momentum, she wasn't going to lose her own serve, and she was just better than Sabalenka was for the last 30 minutes in that match.
Perhaps we forget perhaps how long tennis matches can go on for, and we expect players to be almost robotic, but obviously they're going to have dips during a game, and a coach can help turn that around. Makes me think of ultra runners, and they say that when they get to the aid station and they see their crew, they can reset themselves. So it's that almost like that's the same sort of thing. It gives you that extra perspective from the outside.
Yeah, that's definitely what it's about. Like, interesting. We spoke about tennis stats. Like, I wonder what the best metric to try and gauge momentum is. Because tennis feels to me like a sport really of momentum. That's why players take an injury timeout or a medical timeout when they lose a set, because they just want to break the flow of the game. It's cheating.
So
That's what they do. So tennis feels like really, really vulnerable to momentum swings. And I reckon if you can get to the coach and just reset yourself, you would probably be able to dilute or neutralize that momentum swing from happening.
Okay. Well, that wraps up the Australian Open, first big event of the year. So I was going to look at contact sport and youth briefly, because it leads into a paper that you publish later on. But there's an interesting paper being published. It was at the end of 2025 called Contact Conundrum. Are we introducing contact at the correct time in youth sports? And it examines the trade-off between the early adoption of contact in youth sport against the risk of both long and short-term injury. It's a big issue, obviously, for the kids themselves, but also the parents, the coaches, and sporting bodies have obviously got to deal with it, because obviously today's kids are going to be tomorrow's participants of the sport. And contact sports, especially now, they need to navigate this conundrum, as the author calls it, to survive. So I was reading the paper, and it says that more than 1 in 4 youth athletes seek medical attention for sports injuries annually. Participation in high-risk collision sports is stagnating because families are shifting towards lower-risk alternatives like golf, soccer, and tennis are quoted here. So there's this tension, isn't there, between delaying contact to reduce immediate or cumulative injury, but also there's this argument that you can introduce contact early to ensure the technical mastery, and we've talked about this before in rugby. So the key findings of the report suggest that while raising the age of contact can significantly reduce cumulative head injury events, obviously of interest to you, a progressive skill-based approach is necessary to fulfill, and they call it a duty of care of the sport in preparing athletes for the eventual demands of collision sports. So where do you fall on this one? Somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I'd say somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's in South Africa towards the end of last year, SA Rugby announced that they were going to try and bring all the schools and provinces in line with age at which contact is introduced, because there were some places in South Africa where kids were playing full contact at 6 or 7 and other places where it's been delayed to 10 or 11. So they've tried to create some uniformity there, which brings us in line with many countries around the world. New Zealand, England, Ireland, Scotland, I think all have similar. You don't do contact until you're about 10 or 11. Now, some critics are saying that that's too early. I don't know, and I don't really know how you would show this. What I do believe to be the case is that if you are technically not proficient, then it increases your risk of injury. So you've got to ask, like, is there a minimum dose timed early enough to create that technical proficiency? Now, I'm sure that you could take a 15 or 16-year-old and teach them good tackle technique fast enough that by the time they're young adults, they are proficient. The problem is that that's already after adolescence, and we know that the risk, so if you look at concussion rates in young rugby players, at the ages of 9, 10, 11, like it's extremely low. The moment you get to 16, like it spikes, and that's because you're now measuring it after that adolescent watershed. Kids are bigger, faster, more powerful, stronger. They're just physically mature, and so the speed and the forces in tackles and contacts go up. So I think there would be a danger of delaying technical training until after that. I think you probably have to introduce it early. The other interesting thing is in the data that we've got from the mouthguard research studies in the community game, the head acceleration rates are really low when you look at children. So when we talk about contact, we have to understand that not all contact is risky for the head specifically. Even in the adult elite game, only about 2/3 of tackles cause a head acceleration. In other words, 1/3 don't. So for every 100 tackles you see in a match, 30 to 40 of those don't actually cause a measurable head acceleration in a player. Now, that to me would be classified as a safe contact. The other 60 do cause head accelerations of different magnitudes, most relatively small, but some relatively large. So I would like to see this conversation move away from just a blanket statement saying contact is bad. Unsafe contact is bad. And contact that causes significant head accelerations might be bad in children. But if we can figure out like what causes those, then we can understand what doesn't, and then you just want to introduce more of that. Because I actually think what rugby needs to move towards is more contact that doesn't cause head acceleration. That's what we got to figure out, is nuance.
Because this paper, it presents a balanced case. It's got a case for delaying it, and it's got a case for earlier progressive introduction. Going back to rugby union, in the paper it says, based on data for under 13 male forwards, modifying contact rules could prevent approximately 236 HAEs annually per player. So that's a head acceleration event, right? It says a 4-year delay in contact introduction could prevent over 1,000 head acceleration events for a single athlete. That's quite startling when you put it that way. So they're putting that as the case for delaying, because there's a reduction in cumulative injury and head impacts.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sound great for rugby, does it? If you think, all right, we'll delay by 4 years, and we've already saved them 1,000. But in the meantime, are they learning to tackle properly?
Yeah, and
are they preparing themselves for the adult game?
And 230 to 240 a year is probably best case scenario, right? Because that's probably as many as you get.
Averaging 393, it says here, that they average 393 total HAEs per season.
And you're going to take 2/3 of those away.
Modifying contact rules, yeah.
See, I think that's probably a little bit ambitious. If there's one thing that I've learned in the last 10 years in rugby is that even small changes take a lot of effort, and you probably move the needle less than you think. So I reckon modified contact probably takes that from 393 down to 320. But to eliminate 230 out of 390 feels to me like a bit of an overreach. Because nothing we've tried.
The case for the others.
Sorry, nothing we've tried. Lower tackle height. Nothing is. We've seen 5 to 10% changes in head contacts and injury rates and whatever else. It's really difficult to move the needle.
Because they say on the case for earlier and progressive introduction, obviously you're going to acquire the skills. And they say, to do with cognitive readiness and the developmental window, significant improvements in processing speed and executive function occur between ages 5 to 7, and then between 7 and 11, children are developmentally capable of learning structured rule-bound contact skills. So that's when they're saying that you should be bringing these skills in between 7 and 11 to prepare them for the future.
Yeah,
it's a tricky one. And it made me think of, we had a discussion on Discourse about heading the ball in youth football. And this was spurred by the sad death of Gordon McQueen, who was a footballer. And the coroner, although he died of pneumonia, the frailty said, the coroner, this is talking about Gordon McQueen, it says it was due to a combination of vascular dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I can't say it. CTE.
CTE.
The coroner said, what's the third word? I can't even.
Encephalopathy.
That's the one.
Yeah.
But the coroner did say it's likely that repetitive head impacts sustained by heading the ball while playing football contributed to CTE. So it's kicked off a little bit of a debate about concussion in football, and apparently it's banned in Keith's school. At under-9 football training, heading is banned at that level, so the girls there learn to play without it. And it's obviously a topic in youth football of whether youth players should be brought up heading the ball, because what's going to happen then when they transition into the game, and should the game have heading at all? It's different to rugby. It's different to rugby because in rugby, contact is an integral part of the game. You can't remove tackling from rugby.
Correct.
But can you remove heading from football?
So it's interesting because I saw some match data from under 12s and under 10 and under 8 football, and the number of headers in a match are incredibly low. I think at like under 8 level, it's like less than 2 a match on average. So the ball, because they're so small, they hardly ever kick the ball in the air, and when they do, they hardly ever do so in a way that allows someone to head it. So you could look at that in 2 ways, right? But one of them is to say, well, if you said no heading allowed until you're 12 years old, it barely changes the under 8 game. Like it's the same game they're playing already. Like there is no heading anyway, so you're banning something that never happens. But what it would do is it mean you don't have to practice headers as a kid in training. Because I remember when I was playing football in primary school, we used to do a heading drill at training where you'd sort of line up, the guy would throw the ball at you and you'd head it and so on, you know? What we were practicing that for? Because no one ever headed a ball in a match for about 4 years. So the point I'm trying to make is that I think you can fix it there without changing the game in any meaningful way at all. Now the conversation shifts and says, well, if you then do start at the age of 13, 14, playing in matches where there are 8 headers a match, by the time you're 16, maybe there's 12 headers a match, did you need to learn to head the ball when you were 8, or could you learn it later? I think you could probably learn heading later in life. Rugby tackling...
Yeah, it's not like it's a...
is a little bit different.
Hugely technical skill, yeah.
Yeah.
But is there a case of saying, I mean, in the adult game, removing heading from the game completely? Because they did, there was a couple of trial matches they did in a place called Spennymoor in 2021 and 2022, where they trialed it where you could only head the ball in the penalty area in one match. And that didn't have too much of an impact, apparently, but removing heading completely from the game, it felt like 5-5 and changed the game fundamentally. So,
yeah.
Do you think it's something that football have to wrestle with?
They probably do. It's interesting because, like, we know that the contact sports, Australian League rules, Aussie rules, NRL in Oz, obviously NFL. That's how everyone knows what you mean when you say CTE, because there's been movies about it. Will Smith has told us all what CTE stands for.
I bet they can't say it.
Rugby League and Rugby Union have obviously got their lawsuits. So, like, those sports, clearly there's a reckoning. You know, to quote John Dobson, the bill has arrived. It'd be interesting to see, like, by 2040, whether there is a generation of footballers aged 50 to 60 who are playing now and who have identified cases of CTE. Because the one argument is that the balls that they played with back in the 1960s and 70s were heavier, they used to soak up water, and that the mass of those balls as a consequence would have caused this to happen. And maybe synthetic balls don't. But at the same time, synthetic balls are flying faster, and kinetic energy is a function of velocity squared, unlike mass. You know, mass is linear. So it could well be that there's a reckoning coming for football with these cases. But certainly you don't hear
we've
many.
Had Jeff
Astle.
Yeah, Jeff Astle, Nobby Styles. There are a few of them, and I think we might be seeing more.
And that's what's going to be interesting. So, like, will the players from the early 2000s who would have been retiring at 30, they'll be in their 50s now, we're going to start seeing those players. Also, I mean,
Steve Howie used to play for Newcastle. He's struggling with it. He's only 53 now. So...
I mean, there was that study. There have been a few, like Angus Hunter's a scientist in Scotland, and they did some brain imaging studies and showed that after playing a game, there were some brain changes. The problem with those brain imaging studies is no one really knows what they mean clinically. And they're quite difficult to do because, like, it could, you know, there's so much noise from playing the game that it's difficult to isolate the signal caused by brain injury as a result of repeated headers. So I don't know what to make of that. And there have been some studies out of Scotland. Russell et al., I think, is the author, where they've looked at the prevalence of neurodegenerative diseases later in life as a cause of death. So this is autopsy-based results in Scotland, for instance, that one paper. And I think they showed there that footballers were more likely to die with dementia, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. But what was interesting, for instance, is goalkeepers were, I think, more likely than anyone else, and they're the ones who are not heading the ball. So it's still a messy to be confirmed space, I think.
Let's run a hypothetical scenario. If football have almost suddenly discovered this problem, realized they've got to do something about it, and they came to you because you've been the expert on World Rugby, and they say, what do we do? What is our very first step in how do we start to tackle this problem? What would be your advice? The very first steps.
Well, it's difficult because, like, the normal step in a sort of public health model is you have to establish the extent of the problem. But the problem only appears in 20 years' time after the exposure to the cause, if you believe that model, that it's repeated head impacts. So they would have a challenge there. Maybe what you would start off by doing is introducing some sort of regular cognitive and brain function testing in players in their careers, to see if you can find any acute effects of hitting the ball and so on. Maybe that's the start point. But those things are so
it's
blunt.
finding the data. Yeah.
Those tools are blunt, like you can pass them when you're concussed, and sometimes you fail them when you're not. We know that from rugby. There is no. Now we're entering the era, we've mentioned this, where you get messenger RNAs. You can take saliva and you can look for markers of brain damage in the saliva, for instance. It's not 100% known what those mean as well, but I think we're getting closer to that. So maybe that's what I'd start with, is some large-scale 3-season study looking at markers of potential injury, brain injury in the saliva, and then you can base your actions and decisions on those. I think there's also a cohort of thousands, if not tens of thousands, of retired players. They are being surveyed. There's a guy called Vincent Guterbaj, who I think is the world leader in that regard, looking at retired players and seeing what the prevalence is of these conditions in those players. So you'd want to try and bring all those data streams together and then say, okay, is there a problem here that we need to react to?
And then obviously with the work you've been doing, you study the different aspects, the different statistics, but you've got to have the data beforehand. So they're probably looking at it, but they haven't got the data all lined up and ready to go, perhaps.
I mean, I think I've said on this podcast before, like in 2014, I remember going to the International Olympic Committee conference in Monaco, and there was a session on concussion, and football was speaking, and the chief medical officer at the time was asked about it, because back then, remember that World Cup in 2014, there was the concussion to the German player in the final, and he subsequently said he can't remember the final, doesn't remember the match. So they were being asked about it, but they didn't have a temporary replacement in place at that moment. There was no opportunity to take a player off and do a concussion check. It had to happen on the field. And the chief medical officer says, no, there's no problem in football. We're not worried about it at all. And the reason back then, the reason they weren't interested in doing a removal and a screen is because they thought that the players would cheat the system and they'd game it for the benefit of because if you got a temporary sub coming on, they would fake head injuries and all sorts of stuff. So they were worried about that more than they were about the concussion problem at that time.
Is there a concussion protocol in football now? I'm thinking. I don't really watch it enough.
There is, but it's not like a 10-minute off-field thing. It's like the players are allowed to come to the sideline for a few minutes, I think, to be checked. And they've got like their Maddox questions, basic cognitive function type stuff. But I think it's certainly due. There are some good people now in football who I think are looking at it, but it's difficult because they don't believe. There are a lot of people in the game who don't believe it's necessary, that concussions are too rare to warrant that kind of intervention, and that it would be gamed by the teams.
So in rugby, you're doing multiple studies. It's not like you've just looked at the data and you've just provided the data and said, here's your solution sort of thing, because you've released another one recently, or you and a team. You're part of examining the relationship between the use of headgear in professional rugby and the risk of head injuries in players. And I got to admit, I was surprised at the results of this when I read it, because you were a co-author and you looked at data from 2018-2019 Super Rugby seasons. That's 253 matches, 607,040 total minutes of match play, and 134,275 tackle events. I don't know how you did that. We'll ask you now. But the main takeaway is, and the paper's called "Wearing Regulation Soft Padded Headgear Does Not Reduce Risk of Head Injuries in Professional Men's Rugby Players," which sort of gives it away. The takeaway is the opposite might be true. There's no protective effect of headgear, and even a risk of increased incidence of head injuries. And so when I read this, I thought that's quite the result to find. It's the opposite of what you'd expect, that protection, in fact, might even make the problem worse. So going back to the data, how did you get this data? Because that's a hell of a lot of, like, 607,000 match minutes. How did you analyze that? On video? Go and just watch it?
Yeah, it's video analysis. Because remember, like, these matches are all coded anyway. Like, someone's sitting there coding tackles and missed tackles and so on. And then at the same time, in parallel to that, we've got all the head injuries. We know when the players come off the field because it's all documented in a central database that World Rugby runs. So what you can then do is you can take the tackle analysis that's been done over here and you can combine it with the head injury analysis that's done over there. And then the missing piece in this study, the third point of a triangle, is was the player wearing headgear, yes or no, when they had to come off? And so that took like a whole year because they had to go back and watch all the cases again.
So that initial, you're saying about all the tackles are logged. That's nothing to do with the head injury part. That's just
It's
the data
done.
that's collected anyway by the teams or whoever.
Yeah, exactly. It's done already. The teams get that data. They use that data in different ways. Like I know in South Africa, for instance, they've chosen 5 or 6 metrics that they think are the best predictors of performance by a player, and then also as part of a team, and they just focus on that. But there are data service providers, Opta, StatPro. There's different companies, and it's crazy. Like there are actually like warehouses or big halls that are set up for analysis, and if you go to those at any time, you'll find 20 people watching football, rugby, whatever it is, coding them, and then they sell those analysis results onto teams to use.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I was quite interested by this, the stats in this, having played rugby myself. 91% of players did not wear headgear.
Yeah.
8% always wore headgear, and 1% wore headgear occasionally. So it's not as prevalent as you'd think, really.
No, and that's why for all the big numbers, the 1,000,000 minutes and the 100,000 this and all that sort of stuff, in the end, it's crazy. We still ended up statistically underpowered in the study because especially in backline players, there just weren't enough concussions in backs wearing headgear to properly do this analysis. So we analyzed as much as we could, and we still probably fell short of what we needed.
Can you define head injuries in the sense of this survey? Because you said it does not reduce the risk of head injuries. Concussion or?
No, the player leaves the field to go for an HIA, whether or not they were identified as being concussed. So we know that for every 100 players who leave the field for an HIA, about 60 end up with a concussion diagnosis. But for this particular study, we were just asking, did he leave the field? Because I think that's like, yeah, the concussion is probably the gold standard because now you've been diagnosed by a doctor. Going off the field for a check is kind of a little bit softer, but you're still disrupting the game when that happens, and you've still had a significant head knock. So we felt like that would be the best one to use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you found there was no protective effect.
Yeah, and the novel part of this study was in the previous papers, like basically they'll look at something called incidence, like so per 1,000 hours of playing, how many times does a player with headgear have a head injury compared to not? But that doesn't account for what you did on the field, because some players wearing headgear might make 5 tackles, and some players wearing headgear might make 35 tackles in a match. So in this particular study, what we said was we don't want to just know like per hour of play. We want to know per 1,000 tackles. So call that propensity. So we looked at it in both ways. We said in 1,000 hours, how much does a headgear player get injured compared to a non-headgear? But also let's look at it per 1,000 tackles. And I think the study, I don't have it in front of me right now, but basically when you were wearing headgear, you were slightly more likely per 1,000 tackles to have to go off the field for a head injury assessment.
Yeah, that's why this increased risk correlation is the bit I didn't really understand.
Yeah.
It says players wearing headgear demonstrate a significantly higher incidence of head injury, IRR 1.78, you'll have to explain that bit to me, and a higher propensity for injury per tackle, IRR 1.66, compared to those not wearing headgear.
Yeah.
Why? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, so that first of all, that IRR is like it's a rate ratio. So what you do is you work out per 1,000 hours, how much does the non-headgear player get an injury, and per 1,000 hours, how much do the headgear players, and that ratio is just the ratio of one to the other. So when it says 1.78, it means that players with headgear are 1.78 times more likely per 1,000 hours to have a head injury than a player not wearing headgear. And the 1.66 is saying that per 1,000 tackles, headgear players are more likely to go off for a head injury than a non-headgear player. Now, this is where things get nuanced and interesting, is one of the big predictors of a concussion is a previous concussion. And so in this particular study, you don't know whether the player's wearing headgear because they've got a history of concussions, which makes them more likely to have a next concussion. And so the headgear isn't necessarily the cause of the next one. It's the symptom or the outward sign that this player knows that they're vulnerable to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, that sort of makes sense.
So this is not an RCT. This is not a trial where you're taking everyone from zero and you're giving some of them headgear and some of them not, and you can see what happens. There's a bias in there where that player who's had 3 concussions in the last 4 years maybe thinks that a headgear is going to protect him or her in future, and therefore wears it when they get their next one. And the other problem is that headgear is position specific. So players in positions that are maybe more likely to have a head injury might be more likely to wear headgear. So that potentially biases it as well. And then the third one is that it might be that wearing headgear gives you a sense of risk that allows you to tackle in a slightly more reckless way, and that then increases your risk of headgear. But these studies are always imperfect because you can't ever really control for those three factors.
Yeah, because you don't want to be a hooker. Unadjusted rate ratio suggested hookers wearing headgear are the 3.75 times higher incidence and 3.83 times higher propensity for head injury than those without. That's quite statistically significant, perhaps, surely.
Yeah, but I think you'll find that there's like lower numbers of them because, again, now you're looking at hookers only. So your 600,000, whatever it is, match minutes for hookers suddenly drops to 40,000. So, so really what this study needs is to be like a 10-year long study, and you need to co-vary for previous concussion history, and you probably need to co-vary for tackle behaviors somehow. Do you make more high-speed tackles or not? That sort of stuff. So they're difficult studies to do, these ones.
I guess that it wasn't quite as simple when I was reading it. I was trying to use my analytical brain these times, because I also found that players wearing headgear are involved in significantly more tackles per 80 minutes across all positions.
Yes, exactly.
Why would wearing headgear make you more likely to tackle?
No, it's the other way around.
That's got to be an anomaly, isn't it? It's like...
Flip that. It's the other way around. Players who make more tackles are more likely to wear headgear.
No, the forwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Make more tackles.
Yeah.
Because you said it's underpowered because not enough backs wear headgear at all. So it's very difficult to draw any conclusions on that side of it.
Yeah, and even forwards, like you said, the overall headgear wearing prevalence was 8%, 9%. 8 all the time, 1% sometimes. So even by the time you strip it down to like, here's our headgear group and here's our non-headgear group, you're comparing a very large group on the one side to a very small group on the other. So yeah, they're difficult studies. But it's an interesting point, because you look at it and you say, well, why is a player with headgear more likely to make tackles? It's not. It's a player who makes more tackles has been told to wear headgear, and therefore it's reverse causality, and that's why, again, like you've asked all the right questions, but if you go to the limitations, I'm pretty confident we listed all those in there, because you
did list them.
Yeah, that's the challenge with this research.
When you started a study like this, did you start with a hypothesis that it...
Yeah. In this case, the hypothesis was that headgear would not be protective, because a study had come out 2022, I think it was, Keith Stokes et al., and they'd looked at injury data from England, and they'd found that there was no reduction in head injury risk in those players. So we were looking to confirm that hypothesis.
We have said before that really headgear is only for sort of preventing cuts and scratches and
yeah,
scrapes.
Exactly.
So it's sort of proving what you already knew. It shocked me that it said it was an increased risk, but obviously that's buried in the stats, the way that statistics work, rather than you're in more danger just because you wear a skull cap.
And the reasons for it, the so-called Superman effect, the previous history of concussions biasing who wears headgear and who doesn't, and the players who make more tackles wear more headgear, and maybe not just more tackles, but more of the riskiest kind of tackles wear the headgear. So that's why for now, like, we're not advocating headgear as a solution to the head injury problem. That said, there's data which I wouldn't say it's imminent, but I think in the next 3 to 6 months there'll be data on a new type of headgear using different materials that may end up showing that it can reduce head accelerations, and that could lead somewhere in the future. So the current iteration of what is worn as headgear in rugby doesn't do anything, but there might be, it's like the shoes, like in 2016, no one thought that new cushioning material was going to enhance performance, and here we are. So it could well be that new materials and technology will improve headgear to the point that they actually do start having an effect. We're definitely keeping close eye on that, but for now, it's not a solution.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of you're doing the analysis that perhaps football needs to be doing on heading, except they can't wear headgear. Well, they could wear headgear, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
See,
I
with
mean, the keepers sometimes do, right?
But interesting. Anyway, we'll move on because we're meant to be moving fast this morning. We're not going to be dragging this one out. Spotted over on Discourse, actually, by Mert. Thanks for that one, Mert. We saw footage of the triathlete Christian Blummenfelt. He was recording a VO2 max of 101.1, which has been widely touted as a world record because apparently previously the highest was 97.5 set by Oscar Svensson in 2012. And I'm sure that 2 years ago, we were having the same conversation about Blumenthal recording a VO2 max of over 100 with Alexander Boo, his coach.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how we're back to this again, but not everybody's convinced about this, and that includes Pogacar's performance director, Jerome Svort. He said, "Can someone please go to Norway and teach the physiologists how to calibrate a metabolic cart?" He wrote that on Twitter or X. Seems like we get dodgy VO2 data every second year, as I just said, with wildly inaccurate values and sensational stories about incredible endurance athletes. Only ever happens in Norway. Bizarre. So we had a little bit of a discussion about this one, and perhaps things aren't always what they seem, because the footage was over his shoulder, wasn't it, of the screen as he was taking his VO2 test. So if you explain first, perhaps, why a VO2 max of 100 is really out there and would be the highest ever recorded. Start there. Why is that so extreme?
I mean, so if you believe the Oscar Svensson one of 97.5, then you've just seen a guy go 4% higher, which is already a big difference. There have been other data points in the 90s. There was a Norwegian cross-country skier, Bjorn Dali, in the 90s, I think 95, I remember. And then I think Kilian Jornet has published data like in the low 90s. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
that's near 100, though.
Yeah, so that's not Norwegian. But anyway, so to have a VO2 max of 100 has got some crazy implications. Your cardiac output must be like astonishingly high, like in the 40 liters per minute range. I mean, it puts you like in the sort of mutant X-Men territory for cardiovascular function. So just so all the listeners understand, what happens in these tests is you start off comfortable pace, and then every minute or two or three, depending on their protocol, the speed increases. Now, on a bike protocol, the power would go up. On a running protocol, which is what this was, the running speed increases, and it gets progressively faster and faster and faster until the athlete can no longer keep up with the demands of the test. So maybe that happens at 450 watts, maybe that happens at 21 kilometers an hour. Whatever the case is, the athlete fails. And the VO2 you measure at that failure point is considered their highest possible. So that is the very limit for what their cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory system can deliver and use at the muscles. So that's why it's a useful metric. And we've spoken before, like marathon running and cycling performance, VO2 max, the size of your engine, if you wish, is one of the key determinants. The problem at 101 is that it starts to create all kinds of wacky implications. So in this case, because it's a running test, you can estimate what the guy's running economy would be. Now, running economy is also an important element of performance in an endurance athlete. The more economical you are, the better. And what we mean by economy is how little oxygen can you use to cover a kilometer. Now, I don't know what Speedy was doing at the end of this test. Let's say it was 20 k's an hour, which I think is probably being ambitious, because he fails after an hour and 14 minutes. Did you notice that on the computer screen? The test is like an hour and 14 minutes long. So
that seems very long for a test.
It is really long, and that's important. We'll get to why that's important in a bit. But let's say he's running 20 k's an hour, which is 3 minutes a kilometer, which I think is probably it's an ambitious stretch to be doing that after an hour and 15 minutes of a max test. Like, you can work out what his running economy would be, and because he's running a kilometer in 3 minutes, and he's using 101 mils per minute. So he's using 300 milliliters of oxygen to cover 1 kilometer. It's atrocious. Like, that's the sort of running economy that you wouldn't find even in a mediocre runner. It's so bad. So that's the first thing you say is, like, it's almost impossible to be that uneconomical. In studies you will find, Carl Foster published some on East African runners, like they'll be at 170 to 180. We tested 15 or so elite Kenyan runners in Cape Town some time ago, and the average was about 185. Some of them were at 190, some of them were in the 170s. Good marathon runners from Spain, for instance, 200 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per kilometer. So we're saying that Carsten Blummenfelt is using 50% more than a typical distance runner. Impossible. So that's the first. It just doesn't add up.
So you're thinking it's erroneous data already before
Well, that's the
we
first
even
sign.
start.
The second thing is when you look at the screenshot, there's a little number there called the respiratory exchange ratio, RER, and it's 0.93. Did you notice that bit?
Yeah, but you've got to explain this RER to me because it seemed quite important in the conversation on discourse and I wasn't quite getting it.
Yeah, so RER is respiratory exchange ratio, which is basically the ratio of the carbon dioxide divided by the oxygen. So it's the volume of carbon dioxide you exhale as a function of the oxygen that is consumed. Now, when you are at rest, that figure will be in the 0.7 to 0.8 range, depending on the fuel you use. Because interestingly enough, if you're only burning fat, that number is 0.70. Because for every liter of oxygen, you produce 0.7 liters of carbon dioxide. When you are only burning carbohydrates, it's 1.0 because you use 6 oxygens, and you produce 6 carbon dioxide. So physiologically, we talk about a range from 0.7 to 1. When you do a incremental exercise test like this one, and the exercise intensity is getting harder and harder and harder, what happens is your muscles need to burn ATP, right? Because that's how they're contracting. And every time we break down ATP, we produce hydrogen ions. And so we have to buffer those hydrogen ions. And part of buffering hydrogen ions makes carbon dioxide. Because what happens is, without going to the metabolic equations, you use bicarbonate, which is a negative ion, to kind of mop up. Think of it as a mop for hydrogen ions. But that process produces carbon dioxide. So in a max test, the respiratory exchange ratio normally goes quite far above 1 because the athlete is now producing so much more carbon dioxide, even more over and above burning carbohydrates. They're now producing excess carbon dioxide, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when the RER gets to 1, is that when you go what we would call anaerobic, or I would call anaerobic? You don't like the term, but
yeah, pretty much.
It's like a threshold.
Yes, it is. It's the point at which you are at 1. Energy is coming entirely from carbohydrate breakdown, and then as we go above 1, we're seeing carbon dioxide liberated or being exhaled as a consequence of the buffering that has to go on in the body to try and deal with all the hydrogen ions that are being formed through ATP degradation or breakdown. So yes, to simplify that slightly. Now, you'll read studies where they do max tests, and one of the criteria for knowing that you've achieved a true maximum is a respiratory exchange ratio, an RER value above 1.1. And oftentimes they'll say it's not valid if you don't go above 1.1. Now, in Blummenfelt's case, he's failed, maxed out at 0.93. So he's still aerobic. He hasn't even reached that ceiling now of being. So that's the first. So then you say, well, hang on, that can only happen if you understand that equation. That can only happen if the oxygen level is being over measured, because it's CO2 divided by O2. So maybe we over measure oxygen in order to get a lower than physiologically capable respiratory exchange ratio.
So in layman's terms, if its RER is only 0.93, that would suggest he's actually even got even more to give in this test.
Yeah, because his
VO2max should be higher.
Because his fuel use at that point is probably 25% fat, 75% carbs. So the question would be, well, he hasn't failed for metabolic reasons. Now, in defense of that low RER, and this wasn't picked up by many people, some people picked it up. When you're doing a test that's like an hour and 15 minutes long, you might well fail without reaching 1.1, 1.15. But the counterpoint to that is if you fail with a lower than normal RER value, you're probably failing with a lower than normal VO2 also. because you can't have one without the other, like going up. So that's a suspicious value. Like it shouldn't be that low. You could argue that maybe 1.15 would be ambitious, but to fail at 0.93, because like why not just go a little harder for another minute? So I do think that's
why I don't get why he's been going for so long.
Yeah, so
75 minutes.
So they've chosen a protocol that is designed to be like a very long duration max test. And that's an important point because the protocol can be manipulated. You can start harder, you can ramp more aggressively to change the length of it. So some protocols you could design that would fatigue you within 20 minutes. If you started at like 200 watts and you go up by 20 watts a minute, within 20 minutes the guy's doing 500 watts. He's failing. But that's a short duration, high intensity failure. Whereas what these guys are looking for, and it's the same for elite cyclists, they also use a very long protocol. Because remember that for Tour de France cyclists, like they're looking at a 45-minute effort on a mountain stage. That's the key determinant of performance. So they design these ramp tests to be longer so that they assess the endurance end of the spectrum, not the high intensity end of the spectrum, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
I remember
it makes sense in terms of training because
I remember seeing the one protocol.
The way I'm looking at
just to tell you, the one protocol was like they started at like 25 watts. I mean, like that's like cycling without a chain on the bike. It's nothing. There's no resistance at all, and they would go up by 25 watts every 3 minutes. So this is an elite cyclist who after 30 minutes is probably only going like 250 watts. He's barely warmed up after 30 minutes. But they do it because
what's the point in that?
Well, they want to test maximal performance after an hour, not after 20 minutes. That's the objective. They want to get the length.
Doesn't make any sense because if the first half an hour does nothing whatsoever, you're not testing anything.
Yeah,
you might as well just get on after half an hour.
Just a very slow warm up. But the point is that
I'm looking at this through the wrong prism.
By the time that elite cyclist gets to an hour, and they've gone, I haven't got the figures in front of me now, I should have worked it out. But like if you go 25 watts every 3 minutes, then like after an hour, you're at 500 watts. That's where they see, that's the magic for them is like, it's almost like they want to do a VO2max test with an element of durability. Durability. Yeah. So yeah, different protocols achieve different things.
It's like a ramp test.
Yeah, it's
just a really long ramp test.
Correct, yeah.
But see, I'm looking at this through the wrong prism. I'm thinking that his target was to go out and get a VO2 max of over 100 when it wasn't. It's just a byproduct of the test he was doing, and probably the equipment, as we think, maybe wasn't calibrated correctly.
Yeah, so on the equipment, and again, I'm not going to get all technical on this because I haven't done these tests for like many years since I've been with rugby. Like I'm not in the lab really anymore. But there are generally two types of machines or devices. The one uses a mixing chamber which collects your air, the inspired and the expired air, and it sort of mixes it all together, and then what it measures becomes an average over a period of exhalations or breaths. Now, by the end of this test, you might be breathing 30 to 40 times a minute. So that little mixing chamber is getting 30 doses of your exhaled air per minute, but the point is it smooths it out. The other type of device that they use for these sometimes is a breath-by-breath device, and that basically measures the oxygen and the carbon dioxide every breath. And that machine is vulnerable to large fluctuations. Normally what happens is if you are using a breath-by-breath, what you do is you average it out over 30 seconds, for example, to try and smooth this issue. Because for various technical reasons, the way the VO2 is worked out is there's a flow meter, a little turbine in the mask. You know, they wear that mask thing. That measures the flow. And then there's a tube that runs into a gas analyzer that measures the oxygen. But the flow is being measured here at the mouth, and the oxygen is being measured over there in the gas analyzer. So they're not measured at exactly the same time. So sometimes you get a timing issue around the calibration that like disconnects the flow from the oxygen. And one of the implications of that, to sum this up very simply, is that you can overmeasure the oxygen in the inhaled air and undermeasure the exhaled oxygen. And then what you get is a big difference, which then looks like a massive VO2, because that's how it's calculated. So I suspect it's a calibration issue. That said, like I saw people on social media saying that the Norwegians are just trolling. They know that it's not true, and they just stick it out there so that people will talk about it. So who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, any news is good news as far.
But I don't
as far
believe
as social media is concerned.
Like I do not believe that Blummenfelt's VO2max is 100 because the implication of that for performance is just not seen in performance. Like again, it implies that his running economy is rubbish, and I don't think that's true. And secondly, even if it wasn't rubbish, he should be running a 2:02 marathon with those
Yeah.
numbers.
Wasn't he going to be a Tour de France cyclist?
Yeah, and he'd
sometime
be
last
riding
year?
7
That
watts a
was the other
kilo
thing.
for 45 minutes with those numbers. But he
Yeah.
doesn't.
He's a big guy as well, isn't he?
Yeah,
He's a pretty
72
big guy. Yeah.
kilos if you work it out. So anyway, I don't think that figure is credible, and for reasons like that other people have expressed. I don't know if I would slag off the whole of Norway's physiologists on the basis of that, like 200.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that seemed a bit extreme from start.
But I do think there's an issue in that measurement, and the RER is a clue, the running economy is a clue, and I think the type of machine they use is the other clue.
Cool. Okay. So the next step for us is going to be the Winter Olympics. Did you see that Lindsay Vonn completely tore her ACL, but she's still going to try and attempt to compete at the games?
So basically, Lindsay Vonn's got one titanium knee and one non-functioning knee. Because I was emailed by a journalist last week from the Associated Press, and they were doing a story on Lindsay Vonn's titanium knee. And the article was basically going to say that, because there were quotes from her and her doctor saying that this might be the way of the future for these kinds of athletes, is to get knee replacements, because a titanium knee performs better than a normal knee. So it's like a cyborg.
Before you even start.
Yeah. So it was like a cyborg argument, and the guy wanted to know what I thought of it. But like it puts you in the same territory as like Tommy John surgery in baseball, LASIK surgery on the eyes. Like, at what point is enhancement unfair?
Removing your collarbones as a cyclist.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, more aerodynamic as well, maybe. But anyways, I don't think that the titanium knee probably outperforms a human knee, but not having having a ruptured ACL definitely isn't an advantage. So I can't believe she's doing it.
Because she's entered for the downhill, a Super G, and a team combined event. So it'd be remarkable if she did, because it was only a week or so she had that crash in Crans Montana, and it's turned out to be a torn ACL, which in America, if you're in American football, it puts you out for like 8 to 10 months normally.
Yeah, I can't believe that you could ski like that on that thing. I mean, what's it going to be like the first time she's got to put any torque through that on a landing?
So I'll be looking out for that one anyway. That and the ice skating. Biathlon, I've been watching the skimo. I've been watching skimo. That's going to be great to watch.
I haven't seen any of that, actually.
The World Championships. Have a look at it. It's the racing uphill, and then at the top, when they get to the top, they do this little jump, and they've got to whip off the padding from the bottom of the skis that allowed them to climb.
Yeah.
And then they can go downhill. It's going to be spectacular. Trust me, the skimo.
Does my now £34 a month on Discovery get me coverage of skimo?
I watched that on YouTube, actually.
Okay.
It was free. It was a recording event on YouTube. The way I'm looking at these Winter Games is I think I'm going to be going by country, because I don't recognize enough athletes by name. So I'm going to be sort of supporting, I don't know why, supporting the countries, because I know France are big. The women's team is big in biathlon at the minute, the French women's team. So they're the ones to keep an eye out in biathlon. That's my only tip, really, so far. Actually, I think the UK have got, the British have got a few good sliders. I think we've got some good skeletons.
Yeah, and their aerials, their park and what's it called, park and pipe team. That's the one interview we hope to line up for you next week. They're pretty good there, so there'll be a lot of UK interest on those ones.
And of course the ice hockey. If the ice hockey comes down to Canada or America in either of the finals, that's going to be huge, obviously, with geopolitical tensions involved.
Did you ever? Yes,
that's one.
Did you ever see that graph of water consumption in Canada during the Olympic ice hockey final of 2014, maybe?
Water consumption?
Yeah. And like basically the game, the sort of ice-off or whatever, face-off, whatever they call it in ice hockey, I don't even know. Let's call it 8 p.m. And then from 8 o'clock until 23 minutes past 8, like the water consumption in Canada was 0. And then at 23 past, it spikes because everyone went to the toilet.
Everybody flushes the toilet.
And then for the next 20 minutes, 0. And then it spiked. And then at the end of the game, it returned to normal. It was really funny to show how many people in Canada were watching it. Yeah, like the cross-country.
It's called a puck-off.
Is that what it's called? Seriously?
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
I
don't know. I'm going to have to find out. It just occurred to me that it might be.
I think it's a face-off.
I thought It's probably a face-off, yeah.
This is the content our listeners love.
So, yeah.
The cross-country skiing will be good if you're interested in country rivalries. You heard, obviously, Norway, the dominant nation, but Sweden, as I said to Avend, Sweden won every gold medal at last year's World Championships in cross-country skiing for the women. Norway won every single men's gold medal. So they are completely dominant in their respective sexes, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in these Olympics.
I don't know if it's just coincidence, but whenever I've been watching the biathlon or the cross country or whatever it is, it always seems to be the women's events. And it occurs to me that it's very sort of egalitarian, the whole thing of winter sports, is it really does place men and women exactly the same in terms of prominence, in terms of coverage at least, and the way that the events are treated. It's great to see.
I think these games, I saw a stat, are the first ever Olympics, summer or winter, to have exactly 50% men and women.
I've got a feeling the Nordic combined don't have women. I remember reading that. I think.
Really? Okay, I don't know that.
But I'd have to check that.
But as a whole, I think that it's the first one that gives statistically similar numbers. It might be 49.5 versus 50.5 or something, women versus men, but I think it is pretty equal.
Yeah, the women's Nordic combined would not be added to the Olympic program because it lacks universality, whatever the hell that means, while warning that the men's Olympic spot is also at risk due to low interest. So the Nordic combined.
Nordic combined is a strange one. I don't understand why it exists. Like, I understand biathlon and how biathlon would have emerged as a sport because it was about skiing and shooting. It's almost like a military pursuit in the same way that modern pentathlon in the Summer Olympic Games is this. Like, people go, this is crazy, but it's like horse riding, fence. It's a military thing, right? But what's the point is cross-country skiing and ski jumping? I've never understood that myself.
Apparently it was created in Norway in the late 1800s and designed to test the most complete skier. So, I don't know.
I suppose sometimes you've got to jump when I don't know, but anyway, it is a...
Yeah, we're flailing.
Yeah, the other one that I would highly recommend because they're so intriguing to watch are anything that's like got a match race. You know, like we enjoyed in the Paris Olympics, the slalom skiing. There are equivalents in freestyle skiing. They go 4 at a time, which is a little bit like BMXs on snow with skis and snowboards. And there's also a parallel giant slalom in the snowboarding, which is pretty cool to watch. So like I would, if you're only going to watch a few events, then those would be other ones to take note of. So yeah, but I'm really looking forward to the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have a live chat on at least one event to test out our new...
Yeah, I mean, and I think biathlon for me is that's the one I'm looking forward to the most, particularly because the Italians have the men's maybe joint favorite in Giacomo. And they've also got Lucas
There's so many
Hoffa,
disciplines there.
In biathlon.
Yeah, there's like pursuit, mass start, various relays. The relays are quite good. You always like a good relay, don't you?
Yeah, biathlon does have the feeling of having too many events for me, though, because you can win the same medal basically 3 times. You can win in the individual,
you can win
the
gold
mass start, and the pursuit.
Because you win gold. If you win gold in the pursuit, it gives you the advantage. No, in the sprint, it gives you advantage in the pursuit, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
There can't be many Olympic sports where winning one gold medal leads to an advantage in another gold medal.
True. Anyway, so yeah, we're looking forward to that. So yeah, the plan is, as I say, you've obviously got your 3 sports this week. You've had 2. Next one's due tomorrow. And then next week we'll hopefully do a guest interview with one of our supporters, actually, Leslie, who has been at these games as an athlete and a coach. So that should be cool. And then we'll try and bring you other insights. But as we said earlier, like live chat is now going to be a thing. Science of Sport live event chat. And one of those will be for the Winter Olympics. So those of you who are supporters of the Science of Sport, you look out for those links and we'll send them to you. Basically, you just click on the link, you register, and you're in the chat room. Easy enough. Mm-hmm. And finally... nothing else. Although one thing, did you see that the World Athletics have declined to ratify Kip Lima's half marathon world record because he ran too close to the timing car?
No, I didn't see that.
It was announced last night. It was announced last night. So he ran like a insane 56:40 something or other last year, I think it was. And it hasn't been ratified. So the half marathon world record stays with Yomif Kajalcha. And the reason it wasn't ratified is because he spent too much of the race too close to the car. getting a draft benefit.
We did talk about this, didn't
Yeah,
we? We did talk
yeah.
about it on Discourse.
So yeah,
That's
that's just an interesting one I saw this morning.
Who's at fault, him or the car? He can't back off, so it's the car driver.
Yeah, the car's just got to go 50 meters further in front of him, you know. But they obviously planned it like that.
Wait.
They looked at the sub 2 hour marathon and they said like that's the way to do this. So good for World Athletics, I think, for stopping that nonsense.
Down with nonsense. Right, let's call it.
Yeah, that's it, folks. Thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed our Winter Olympics coverage. There's more to come, plus other stuff. We're not just going to like submerge ourselves in snow and ice for the next 2 weeks. We'll keep bringing you other insights. Let us know what's on your mind. You know how to do that. Become a supporter, price of a cup of coffee, and tell us what you're thinking over on Discourse. And we really look forward to some of you, all of you, joining us for some chats. You had something else?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say thank you to Lewis, who I was in a fell race on Saturday, and Lewis got third.
Oh, wow.
In the fell race, and I came absolutely nowhere. He absolutely smoked me. But it was nice to see him after the event. He recognized me and said hello. So well done, Lewis, on that one.
Very good. We have overachieving listeners, supporters.
Indeed.
Okay, folks, we'll speak to you all again really soon. Enjoy the opening of the Winter Olympics, and we'll see you all again next week. For now, goodbye.